Let's get together and talk about. Let's get together and talk about. Let's get together and talk about. Let's get together and talk it out. So, hey guys, what's going on? Today I want to talk to y'all about my channel, and this is basically the introduction. Because at first, honestly, I was going to do a review channel to movies, but then I realized that I was actually probably going to talk about a lot more than just movies, and so I really wanted to just kind of compile how I'm going to be looking at things and kind of give y'all basically a rundown of how I'm going to be talking about things and how I'm going to be reviewing things from this point on. So, first things first is stories. Now, when you talk about stories, what is a story? Well, basically, a story is, to me, anything. Because, they talk about art. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, 1,000 words, that's a story. I mean, very short story, but it's a story nonetheless. And then, when you look at movies, what are movies? They're stories. Just like TV series. They're stories. They're just, stretched out over hours and hours instead of being compiled into like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then when you look at, books, they're definitely stories. And then also books have series, and then you have comic books. So, and then there's actually, tons of, different genres and then those things like graphic novels and such like that. So you could really just go on and on about what a story is. But really, when you look at the meaning of a story, to me, it's always about an arc. It's always about a journey, like somebody growing, something happening, like a purpose. And you're supposed to look at that and kind of understand it. And within that big, giant story, there are usually a lot of tinier stories that you can look at and can learn from. Now, I know by now some of you are probably just like, well, in definition, a story can technically be a level of a building. Well, I know that, and I know that a story also can be anything like in a newspaper or such like that, obviously. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is how stories are told, because technically, whenever you talk about stories, if you look at the definition, it'll tell you that it's something that's recounted in someone's life or imaginary, real or if you look up the definition for it, it'll tell you that son of a fucking bitch. Of course, we could go on all day about the definition of a story, but when you look at a story, it's not exactly just for entertainment, because if you think back in history, stories were how history was kept up with until we actually got down to writing down, on paper, or, if you want to talk about, cave paintings and shit like that. Obviously, that could be, your own version of history keeping, but mainly stories were told. And the thing about stories is the format in which they're told. And that's mainly what I want to get at when I talk about reviewing something. Because I feel like a lot of people overlook the format of something they're reviewing whenever they go to review it. Now, when it comes to the format of movies, there are a few directors who I believe are very good at telling a story within movies. And one of them that I feel is really good is Christopher Nolan. Now, many people, view him as one of the best directors of our generation, and I obviously agree with this because I own a lot of his movies, and whenever I watch his movies, I'm always astounded by the level of genius that's put into it. And also, every time I watch Christopher Nolan, I'm just like, who the fuck is paying for all of this? But that's just not the point. The point is how good he is at storytelling with the movie format. Because one thing you hear him talk about in one of his interviews is how important the beginning and the ending of a movie is. And you can tell this is very important to him, because if you go back and you watch any of his movies, you can always tell that the beginning and the ending is always the best parts of the movie. Like, you can almost say that the ending of every single one of his movies, like the last 5-10 minutes, is the most shut the fuck up type shit you've ever seen, especially Tenet, which is one movie I'm going to get into later on in a different video. The thing about telling stories when movie format is how you can always not tell it in a linear way. Now, the one thing I appreciate about this is that it's really hard to do this in a book format, because it's really hard to capture someone's imagination within a page or two or a chapter inside of a book the way you can within a few seconds of screen time with a movie. Because everyone knows in a book, there could be a whole page or two worth of details that are spent talking about just details, and then when you go to the movie, it's literally 2 seconds of a scene. But the thing about those 2 seconds is how much time went into putting everything into place for it to be there for that 2 seconds. And that's another thing I think that's really important about movies that people don't think about too much, is the fact that everything you see, you're supposed to see. And that's why if the director did their job right, everything will make sense when you see it, because they have a very, very like crucial amount of time to show you stuff. I mean, a lot of people talk about how the the film industry, it puts a lot of pressure on the directors to cut down time because they're like, well, people don't want to sit there for hours and hours, which is almost funny in contrast, because the biggest series that won all of the most awards at once, Lord of the Rings, also all of the movies were over 2 hours long. Everybody loves every second of it. So honestly, I think if you make a movie and you make it the right way and with a lot of love and care, anybody will sit down to watch it, especially for any amount of time, because literally the only thing anybody does whenever they get something they love is beg for more of it when it comes to an end. Obviously, with Marvel ending and Iron Man no longer being there, the only thing people in the world want more right now, if you're a Marvel fan, is bring back Iron Man. And I absolutely understand the pull for that, because you're just like, I just want more of it, just give me more. But as everyone knows, with anything in life, too much of one thing is not good enough. And plus, I mean, Robert Downey Jr.'s got a life, he's kind of got to move on with that shit. Like, can't be sitting there doing all that for all the time. But the thing about stories, I think that people have really lost sight of, is how we're not supposed to be caught on them forever, or like one character is not supposed to be part of it forever. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, Lord of the Rings, one famous thing in there is how Bilbo talks about how everybody has to come in and go in stories. Nobody's there forever. We all have our part to play in a story. And that's the thing, is that, that's what Robert Downey Jr. did with the Marvel series. He started it off, and then now he's gone, and it's got its own new set of actors, and they're all going their own way, and it's taken off, and hopefully everybody still loves it, who loves it. If you don't, you don't. It's all great. But getting back to the format, the thing I love about Christopher Nolan is, with the way he tells a story about not doing it linear, is that he always takes a chance of losing his audience, because with anything, if you do something that's not the norm, that people don't like, there's always a chance, that one person might just get up and leave. They might not ever take a chance with the movie. And with Christopher Nolan, he always starts off his movies, like, usually at some point in the middle, or like with something crazy going on, and you're just like, what? And one thing I kind of like about that is that it puts intensity on it, because for once, like, not just in Christopher Nolan films, but in many other films, if you start off in the beginning scene as like the main character in some shit, and they're dealing with problems, and you're like, they're hurt, and like they're in a bad spot, and then it flashes back and it's like 3 weeks earlier, or like 72 hours earlier, or some shit like that. And that kind of puts in some intensity on the movie, because then you're like, oh my god, you're hooked. You're like, I gotta be here to find out how they got to this point. But then also it kind of can pull some things away from it, because if the director puts a lot of spots in the movie before that moment where it makes it seem like the character's in danger, like they might die, you might not feel that intense, because if you can realize that you're not in the area where that thing happened, you just be like, oh, well, they're going to get through this, I know they're going to make it, because they got to make it to that spot that I saw earlier. So it can work both ways, depending on what you're doing. If the director knows what they're doing with that, I think it can really work well, but it can also backfire if everyone's not on point with the story that's being told and knows what's going on. And that's one thing I've realized a lot about a lot of successful stories and a lot of things that get a big cult following, is that usually everyone on board had a great time with it, and everyone would like love the stories they were telling. Like, just a couple ones off the top of my head: Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Firefly. Now, I know I just said a lot of TV series right there, but I was mainly just talking about, working on a project together, and everybody coming together and working on one thing and loving what they're doing usually makes for a really good product, and that's just what I meant by that. But anyways, going back to the formats about the movies. One thing about Christopher Nolan that I think is really good is how he crams so much detail and energy into the few hours that he gives. And don't get me wrong, a lot of his movies can be over the 2 hour mark. I believe Tenet was almost 3 hours, and if I remember, Inception and The Prestige were both over 2 hours long. But the main thing I want to talk about today is kind of like how he hides something in like plain sight, and how he kind of does it in the way that you can only do in a movie format. Like, yes, you could do it in a TV series, but it wouldn't be as fun and it wouldn't have as much as a wow factor because, it wouldn't be as intense because you're dedicated right there for that, 2 hour mark waiting to see what happens. The thing with Inception at the end with whether or not he's in a dream or not, because, everyone's just like, when the screen cuts out and the top hasn't stopped spinning or it's still spinning, whatever the hell's happening, and people are just like, what the hell's going on? And what I want to talk about is, spoiler, if you haven't seen Inception, go now, stop watching, go watch it, and then come back and start if you're that interested in what I have to say. And the thing about it is whether he's in a dream or not. Now, the thing I want to say is he is not in a dream. He is in the real world. That's his real children, and that's his real dad. Now, I understand that there's an interview out there with Michael Caine saying that he's part of the every scene he's in is the real world, and I understand that Christopher Nolan, I think, backed that up, and I do say yeah, that's cool and whatnot, but that's not the main thing, because if a director had to come out and say something afterwards to confirm it, then they didn't do their job right within the story. And that's the thing about him kind of saying it in that way. It's kind of the cool thing, because he still didn't point out what he did in his movie, which I know I'm kind of doing it right here. Sorry about that, Christopher Nolan. But I just really want to talk about how amazing it is, because a lot of people either say Inception's amazing or it's stupid and they don't understand it at all, like it makes no sense. And I think that it kind of doesn't, go in either. It's either it's simple and you just don't enjoy it because it's simply amazing, or it's amazing and you just love how amazingly amazing it is, going that way with it. Now, the reason why I can say that he probably confirmed it that way and didn't confirm the actual way is because I went back and I watched an older movie of his, The Prestige, and in The Prestige, he talks about, one of the characters that Christian Bale plays is, the main character, can't remember his name right now. That guy, yeah, you know who I'm talking about. He tells the little boy, the nephew of the woman that he meets. I'm messing it all up, but once you tell somebody the secret, no one cares. He's like, the secret means nothing. He's like, it's what you use it for. And that's what I think is the beauty of his movies, is the secret that he has to tell in his movies, and he uses it to make amazing movies and to tell them very well. And I enjoy that, and I'm so glad to not know that secret, whatever it is. Keep the secret, keep making great movies, I'm here for it. But the thing I want to talk about is the secret to Inception. And the thing with that is a thing that he doesn't talk about because it's talked about in the movie. And it's seen in the movie. But the trick to it is that it's never talked about like directly to make you exactly look at it or look for it. And the thing I want to talk about is the totems, because the totems are very important when it comes to Inception. Now, the totems in the movie are introduced as a way to keep track of reality, because in the world you go into dreams, shared dreams, and you can go into different levels of dreams to where it can get very confused and you won't know where reality is. And one thing about this is that in the movie, the main character, Dom, his wife actually tragically dies because she loses track of reality and she believes that she's in a dream world and she needs to kill herself to wake up, and it causes her to commit suicide. Now, the thing about this is her totem, because the whole time you're watching the movie, at the very beginning you see Dom and he has a tiny little top and he's spinning it. And the trick to it is that you learn is that when he spins the top, it keeps spinning and spinning and spinning, and every time it spins, it'll spin on forever if it's in a dream. But if he's in the real world, when he spins it, it'll just eventually topple over, and that's how he knows he's in the real world. But the very cool thing about this is the way the information is delivered. And honestly, that's basically how any director can really claim, their style of directing, is because every story can be summarized. And when it's summarized, it's easy to miss all the good points of the story, because you're just like, you don't have any feeling for it. You're just like, oh yeah, just nice little thing in there, and you go about your business. But the thing about that is how information is delivered. And the thing about the totems and the way the information is delivered in Inception is what I think is really key and really crucial as to why it's simple, but it's also amazing. Because when you start off, all you see is Dom with this little totem, and he's spinning it after you see him come out of these dreams. He came out of a multi-layered dream, and he's spinning his top, and you see him with a gun. And obviously the top eventually quits spinning, and it falls over, and then he moves forward, and then he meets Ariadne, and then they're dreaming together. And then when they're dreaming together, she ends up finding out about totems because Arthur tells her about them. And when Arthur explains it, he tells her that a totem is a specific item that you keep that no one else can know about, because that's the whole point of the totem, is that only you know about it. And if anyone else was to know about it, then they can influence your dreams and make you not know if you were in the real world or not. And the important key to this is what happens later on. So moving forward, Ariadne ends up making her own totem, and then when she ends up going into one of Dom's dreams later on, now actually before she goes into Dom's dream later on, Dom sees her, and he sees her with her chest piece, which is her totem, and he's like, oh, here, let me see it. And she doesn't let him see it, and he tells her, oh, you're learning. And the beautiful thing about this scene, I think, is like, because it's basically kind of like the biggest middle finger of the whole thing, like if you're not paying attention, because whenever they're talking about the totem, he says, oh, you're learning. And then she says, oh, it's an intricate way, like a very good way of keeping track of time, or keeping track of reality, like, was it your idea? And he says, no, it was Maul's, talking about his wife. And then he pulls out the top that we keep seeing him spin. And when he pulls out the top, he says, this was hers. And right there, at that point, you should know that you no longer have to care about that top. That top is meaningless to whether or not Dom is in a real world or not, because it's not his totem. It doesn't mean shit to him. It's just a memento, not a memento, it's basically like he keeps it basically as a guilt because of what he feels with Maul, which I'll explain that later in a different video that I have going on about Inception. But when he pulls out the top and spins it, or he pulls out the top right there, he's showing you the other totem that he has. And I'm not going to say what it is just yet, but I mean, if you know what's going on in Inception, then you already know what I'm talking about. But then you go forward a little bit more in the movie, and like right before they go into the mission right before they're about to go into the mission, she goes into one of Dom's dreams with him, and whenever she goes in there, they're talking, and she realizes that all these dreams she's going into are memories of him and Maul. And she asks him, why do you do this to yourself? And he's just like, because it's the only way I can dream. And she says, why is it so important for you to dream? To which he responds, because in my dreams we're still together. Now, this implies that in the dream world, he's with Maul all the time, which is why Maul keeps popping back up in other dreams that he's not having with her, or not in the memories with him, because she's bursting through his subconscious, because of the guilt that he feels because of what happened. And the way that story is lined up is because you know that something happened to Maul, because as he's told already, Maul died because she killed herself. And if you understand, whenever they introduce the totems, they say, if anyone else knows about what goes on with this, then they can influence your world. So if you're kind of putting everything together, you can kind of get the thing like, oh, he had something to do with Maul losing her grip on reality, and then, of course, you get to the end and it's the big shocker. But the thing about the totems that I want to talk about right there is the fact that he says that they're married. So what you need to be looking for now is Dom's totem, because obviously the spinning top has nothing to do with him. It's just something to do with his wife. So when you talk about Dom's totem, the thing that you kind of have to think about isn't just the fact of who he is. And he tells you at the very, very beginning of the movie that he is the best extractor. And obviously the best extractor would have different, way of doing things than everyone else. So one thing I think is pretty cool is that his totem is in the dream world instead of the real world. So every time he's in the dream world, he knows it because it's something that he has on him when he goes into that dream world. And what it is his wedding ring. Because every time he goes into the real world, he's still married. Which is why he was losing his grip with reality, because of his guilt and the conflict of, his head and his emotion, his logic and his emotion between what he knew was happening and what he felt, because he felt guilt about what he did to Maul, which was influence her world, because he went into her dream world and spun her top and kept it going after she chose to forget that that's what helped her keep track of reality. And all in all, this all leads up to the beautiful moment at the end where Dom is in the airport and he's getting picked up. And if you pay attention, there are barely any scenes to show his hand, but if you look at his hand, you can tell that he doesn't have his wedding ring on, and that signifies that he's in the real world.